Welcome. This talk is called Unfolding the Venture, an 8 level Vedic consciousness model of entrepreneurial development and failure. I'm Vikram Gulati from the Maharishi International University, and this is a part of WAVES 2026 conference theme Living Wisdom, Reintegrating Ayurveda and Vedic Sciences in the Modern World. Let's start with the persistent paradox. Entrepreneurship drives innovation and economic growth, yet 4 in 5 startups still fail within the first 5 years, even in environments with relatively easy access to capital and technology. That gap between effort and outcome is puzzling. Effort and intention clearly aren't the missing ingredients, so something else must be in play. Existing research offers two dominant lenses on how ventures developed, which I will turn to next, but neither one on its own explains why failure happens, recurring even when the founders follow accepted best practices. And critically, failure research tells us something important. Starters rarely die on one mistake. They die because of misalignment, several things going wrong together across vision, strategy, structure, execution, and relationship. That observation is the real starting point for this paper. Those two lenses that we spoke about on venture development are worth looking at closely. The first is stage-based. Ventures move through predictable phases: existence, survival, growth, maturity, each with its distinct managerial demands. And as Churchill and Lewis and later Scott and Bruce described, capabilities that support early survival, like informal control, can become dysfunctional once complexity increases. The second lens is iterative. Blank's customer development and Rees's build, measure, learn loop treat the startup as a search process under extreme uncertainty, learning through experimentation rather than following a fixed plan. Both lenses are genuinely useful and both are incomplete. Stage models describe which stage dominates, while loop models describe how founders adapt within them. But neither explain why the same coherent failure patterns keep recurring across so many ventures. That gap is exactly what Vedic science enters this paper. Vedic science begins from consciousness as the basis of creation, not matter. The Rig Veda describes Akshara, the unchanging field of pure awareness, as the source of all laws of nature. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi describes creation as an ordered self-referral unfoldment from this unmanifest field into increasingly concrete stable form. Crucially, and this matters for everything that follows, every level remains present throughout. The sequence describes which level dominates expression at a given time, not a step that left behind once you move past it. The cone of transcendental meditation maps that unfoldment as its experience in practice, where attention settles from active surface thought into silent, unbounded field at its source. That brings us to the 8 levels of unfoldment on the unified field chart. As thought settles during meditation from the surface down to the source, awareness passes through 8 distinct qualities. Seen from the bottom of the chart, we start from the subtlest: transcendental consciousness, unbounded silent awareness; finer thinking, subtle impulses of ideation; and intellect or buddhi, discrimination and decisions. Then the 5 great elements: space, structure and containment; air, movement and communication; fire, transformation and action; water, flow and cohesion; and earth, and finally earth, stability and durability. Vedic science treats these 8 levels as universal template underlying all of creation and all knowledge. And this paper asks a fairly direct question: can these same 8 levels describe how a startup venture comes into being? Let's zoom into each one of them, starting with the subtlest. These subtle levels, purpose, imagination, and choice, are where every venture actually begins. Entrepreneurship research rarely theorizes the source level explicitly, yet founders themselves describe it as an inner prompting and a desire to create something that is enlivened by the field of all possibilities, the transcendental consciousness. At finer thinking, the entrepreneur has to stay open, playing with the possibilities without premature fixation. Lean startup practices treat ideas as hypotheses for exactly this reason. Then intellect brings discrimination, choosing what to pursue, and just as important, what to say no. Strategic drift is what happens when this discriminating choice is never firmly lands. Then these three levels are largely invisible in mainstream entrepreneurship model, yet they set the direction for everything else that depends on it. Moving to the next level, we get structure and connection. Space and air. Space begins the actual process of manifestation, legal formation, roles and governances, and an articulated strategy that gives ventures boundaries. Startups that delay this formalization in the name of agility often pay for it later once the activity outgrows organizational capacity. Air is the principle of touch and exchange. Customer discovery, investor signaling, early team building, ecosystem participation. This is where learning-based models operate and where the build, measure, learn does its actual work. When air flows well, the venture adapts without losing its purpose. Too little, founders grow rigid and overconfident, ignoring market signals. Too much, uncoupled from intellect's discrimination, and the ventures drift into constant, unfocused pivoting. Next comes action and flow, fire and water. Fire is transformation into visible market presence, heat from early sales that validate the idea, light from marketing that makes the venture visible. Fire depends on air's relationship and intellect's discrimination. Without them, sales effort can scatter across the wrong customer and marketing messages become incoherent. Water is flow in three senses at once. Information circulating through the organization, cash flow keeping organizations alive, poor liquidity, as we all know, is a leading cause of failure. And finally, culture, the trust shared values that binds people together into one coherent system. When water is balanced, the organization behaves like a living adaptive whole rather than a collection of separately striving individuals. And that brings us to grounding, earth, and institutionalization. The most concrete level of expression, earth is the durable structure to which strategy becomes repeatable practice. Management theory has long held that structure follows strategy. Vedic thought parallels this, seeing form as the expression of a guiding intelligence. Many startups never fully reach earth. Without it, the venture remains fragile, premature, permanently dependent on founder heroics, and vulnerable to any shock. Reaching earth doesn't mean becoming bureaucratic. It means disciplined, adaptive form that lets a venture survive even in the founder's absence. Now let's put all these 8 levels together and look at the mapping unfoldment into venture development. Transcendental consciousness is the founder's original impulse of purpose. Finer thinking is the imaginative hypothesis generating phase of opportunity recognition. Intellect is the strategic discrimination of choosing which opportunity to actually commit to and which to let go of. Space is the legal formation, the governance, the articulation of strategy. Air is the customer discovery, networking, and feedback where build, measure, learn loops actually lives. Fire is sales and marketing, heat that converts attention into revenue, light that creates visibility. Water is cash flow, information flow, and culture, and coherence that binds the organization together. And earth is institutionalized structure, repeatable processes that lets venture outgrow founder heroics. All 8 levels are present from day one. What shifts across the entrepreneurial journey is which one dominates. This model reframes failure as a misalignment versus coherence. Rather than a single strategic or tactical error, failure is a disturbance in awareness that later crystallizes into flawed strategy, weak communication, or a dysfunctional culture. Early scaling with strong execution but with no relationship or culture leads to burnout. Endless learning loops without a discriminating intellect lead to strategic drift and stagnation. Premature structure without the underlying relationships and networks leads to rigidity and a siloed organization. Resilience in this view is not operational slack or a cash buffer. It's an inner coherence reflected outwards. purpose aligned with discrimination, discrimination aligned with structure, and structure aligned with action and flow. When these levels integrate, decisions are timely without being impulsive, and adaptation happens without losing identity. So, what are the implications for theory, practice, and founders? For theory, this model reframes entrepreneurship as a vertical coherence across levels of awareness, not just stages in times or loops or learning. It opens up consciousness itself as a legitimate source, along with motivation and cognition. For practice, it becomes a genuine diagnostic tool. Is the founder's purpose intense and clear? Are opportunities explored without premature fixation? Has real discrimination actually occurred? Are boundaries and networks in place? Is fire generating both visibility and revenue? Are cash flow and culture coherent? Rather than defaulting to more effort, founders can ask which specific level is weak or over dominant. And because a startup reflects awareness of the people running it, a founder's development, reflection, self reflection, emotional regulation become just as material to venture success as any financial model. That leaves us with the conclusion: coherence across levels is a measure of venture. Entrepreneurship unfolds through both developmental domains, and learning loops. And Vedic science offers a complementary, deeper account of why misalignment produces failure and coherence produces resilience. This is a conceptual framework. The necessary next step is empirical testing, whether coherence across these levels actually predicts venture outcomes over time. But even now, it suggests a different kind of question for founders and educators to ask. Not just what should we build next, but is our awareness, our purpose, and our structure moving together as one coherent whole? Thank you.